All right, Dan, this one's slightly different because you and I have a friendship and I know most of the story, but I'm still going to ask you the same question I ask everybody, and then we'll
That's perfect. I don't mind repeating myself.
Okay. How did you accidentally fall into franchising? What's your franchise backstory?
Yeah, so, my business, Home Halo, is a non-medical home care franchise, and been in the home care space for about 10 years. First agencies that I started up were in a not-for-profit hospice. And then I had the opportunity to work for a franchisor in the home care space. And so I did that for about 4 years. I've always had a love for business and business models. And I think even from a little kid, as far back as I can remember, I pretended to have businesses, so it's something that's always been in my blood. And, when I got into franchising, it set my world on fire, because you could create a duplicatable business process that most anyone can follow and be successful in that business.
Okay, so I want to dive into part of the story.
Yep.
You're working for another franchisor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, your backdrop, you have experience in building a franchise. So it's a little bit different than someone that is going from corporate America into franchising. So you have that backdrop. Did you contemplate becoming a franchisee? Did you go down that pathway and not find anything that aligned that made you become a franchisor? What was going, not at the finish line, but when you're starting to process this, what's going on through your head?
Yeah, so I guess, part of my journey there is, I worked for the home care franchisor and had some great experiences, met some incredible people. My job was to launch new offices all throughout the country. And so, we put together a rock solid launch plan, which I've added to since. But, that experience in franchising, it really did hit home, and it felt it was a comfort zone for me. Never really considered, getting into any other type of franchise or becoming a franchisee. When I left the franchisor, I went out on my own, and my plan was just to create my own little home care empire, own, offices that I owned throughout the country, and, almost like a Chipotle model where it's, corporate owned versus franchise owned. And, I've had really good success, with those, businesses that I own in the home care space. But I really felt like something was missing. I really enjoyed the opportunity to coach people who were looking to realize their goals and dreams through building a business. Those people that have been in the corporate world for decades and have always looked for a way out. For me, from the time I graduated from college, I always felt like a square peg in a round hole. I never felt comfortable in that corporate space. I always felt like I was capable of more and wasn't necessarily given the opportunities to do all that I could do. I think that I approached being an employee differently because I took ownership in everything that I did. Even though I was an employee, I treated it like it was my own business. And I think that's what made me successful in those roles. But, it's still that ownership aspect of it and being able to, chart my own course and, realize my own destiny. It wasn't available to me in the corporate space. And that's why I've been drawn to the franchising space. For me, I just get such personal gratification from investing in other people and helping them accomplish things that they never even thought possible of themselves. My dad, he's a Hall of Fame high school baseball coach. He's actually getting honored again in August. We'll go there for that ceremony. But, I saw him take average athletes on a regular basis and just pour into them and get them to believe that they were capable of more. He would teach them the fundamentals of baseball. He would teach them strategy and, really being a student of the game. And many of those average athletes, probably including myself, went on to earn Division I baseball scholarships because of what he did pouring into them. I get that same kind of satisfaction through coaching franchisees, who want to build a business and change their lives and change the lives of their families.
Okay, so you're building this what you're calling your empire, and you're going to go the Chipotle model, meaning you're going to go corporate.
Yep.
Do you remember how fast the dial changed to I'm missing something? Like, was it immediate? Was it after you started making some money with it? Like, at what point did that dial shift?
I think it was after I started making money with it. There's that point where you have that excitement of just building something new, and you're pouring into it, and all of your energy, all of your time is going into that. And you don't really have time to sit back and think about things. You're just kind of in do mode and action mode. And then I started making money, and I was making, really good money. And I still wasn't satisfied. That wasn't what was filling my cup. What was filling my cup was helping others, and so with franchising, I can fill my cup while pouring into other people as well.
This is a hot seat. So here's
this is where you're turning up the heat, huh?
Well, you're going to have the right answer, but I think it's important to note. So if I look at senior care in totality, what I would say, I'm gonna paint a picture, and I want your opinion on this.
Yep.
The demand is so high, and the supply, even now, I would say really in the franchise segment, called the last 12-ish years, is when all these brands really got defined. Even with all these franchise locations, the demand is still higher than the supply. And so it's almost like for the vast majority of senior care brands, the logo on the door changes, but the fundamentals of how you caregive for a human being doesn't. And so there's not a ton of point of differentiation. And so if I shift over from a business opportunity standpoint, the reason there's a point of differentiation doesn't necessarily have to be for most of the brands that they can do X, Y, or Z different than their competition. It's more so that the competition has sold out, and therefore you go down the waterfall and say, here's one that's available in the market that I want, and that's where you settle. On occasion, especially those that have built up some legwork, you'll hear a franchisee talk about the depth of support and culture is what pushed them over the edge when it's available. Mm-hmm. But the big boys, they master that, and they continue to grow, and then they're sold out. So the question is, like, knowing the lay of land, that it is a sea of sameness, but the demand is still so high that it doesn't overly matter. Yep. How have you established a point of differentiation for your brand so that if you're saying, here's how we're different from the competition, this is how you stand out?
Right, exactly. And those are great points. And, the senior care space is very crowded. You can go into any city and, throughout the United States, and you can probably find 50 to 100 different home care brands there.
And often the caregiver could work for multiple ones.
Yes,
right.
Exactly. And that's an excellent point as well. And, to me, when you look at the senior care franchise space, I think there's something like 65 or 70 other, brands that are out there that are senior care brands, but if you look at like the top 15 to 20 brands and you combine all of their revenue and you compare it to what the industry is, they still don't even collectively have 10% of the market share. So that means that 90% of the care that's being provided is, by mom and pops or smaller regional types of senior care companies. Some are excellent. I have no issues with other senior care franchise brands. I think there's some absolutely excellent ones out there. I don't consider them my competition. My competition is a lack of awareness of the impact that senior care can provide to families and, to the clients that we serve. It's not other home care brands. When you look at, so how do you differentiate in a very crowded space like that? There's a few different things. So I would kind of break that into two different buckets. How do we differentiate from a franchisor standpoint? How do we differentiate from a consumer standpoint? Because they're a little bit different. I think from a franchisor standpoint, a couple of differentiating factors, when I look at Home Halo and in our brand, is that I've done it myself. I'm doing it myself. I'm in the game with you. What I'm teaching you, I do every day, and so when I'm launching a new franchisee, I know what bumps in the road they're going to face. I've overcome those obstacles, and I can show them exactly what I've done myself, and so that's a real point of distinction, because a lot of home care franchises that are out there do not own their own corporate locations. They have just franchised locations, and they're two truly different business models. Franchising and home care, totally different animals, require totally different things. For me, I'm comfortable and competent operating in both. So that's definitely a differentiator for us, is that, I've done it myself. I'm very active, in the launch process and the support process, and plan to be into the future. When you look at from a franchising space also, there's some huge brands out there that are generating, over $1 billion of revenue in a year. Massive brands. And they may have 700 locations, 1,100 locations worldwide. They're pretty sold out. They don't have those prime territories that are available. I have prime territories available in nearly every state. And so that's a huge point of differentiation for us as well. So, you look at that on the franchisor side. If you look at the consumer side, how do we differentiate there? Like you said, we use the same caregivers. We're providing help with activities of daily living, bathing, dressing, grooming, ambulation, transfer, all of those. We're helping them with instrumental activities of daily living, the light housekeeping, meal preparation, running errands, taking them to doctor's appointments, all of that kind of stuff. We're all doing the same thing. That part of it is kind of commoditized, if that's the right word for it. But when you look at what is your biggest barrier to growth in home care as a home care business, it is, caregivers, caregiver shortage. You hear that, in any industry, there's an employee shortage. Everybody's struggling to find workers, especially hourly paid workers. For me, with my perspective, I don't have any trouble finding caregivers. I can go into nearly any market in the country and I can find caregivers. The key is to keep them, and so when you look at a caregiver, why do they leave your company? It typically isn't for money. What they leave for is that they're not getting the number of hours that they're looking for, or they're not getting those hours in the time frame that they're actually available. And so what happens is they get frustrated and they leave. They go to the next company because they can find a job tomorrow or later today, if they choose to leave one of our companies. So the key is to keep them. One of the things that we have really tried to differentiate on is how we schedule caregivers. And we have a unique strategy on how we do that. And what it leads to is really maximizing the potential of that caregiver. If they have 8 hours available, we want them to work 8 hours. They want to work 8 hours. If I'm only giving them 4, they're not going to be happy. And what happens is caregivers that aren't happy leave their clients, and now you have unhappy clients. And so you have high turnover of both. If you can do a better job of scheduling your caregivers and you can give them the hours they're looking for and the time frame that they're looking for, they'll stay with you. You have greater caregiver satisfaction, which leads to greater caregiver retention. And with that, you have greater client satisfaction and retention. So it's kind of that virtuous cycle, the chicken or the egg, which one came first? You take better care of your caregivers and you'll be able to build your business better.
All right, I have a crazy statement, but you have operated. You're a large multi-unit operator. You have a passion for helping. You've built strategies to onboard franchisees. You understand the caregiver and how to keep them. If I'm a senior care brand out there, one of the larger ones, shouldn't I be just knocking on your door and say, let's just buy you now? Because it's also hard to find great talent on the franchisor side. Like, you just painted such a valuable picture. are you hearing, or have competitors reached out and said, we need you? You're going to be the magic. You're going to create a thorn in their sides.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I've necessarily heard from competitors. I have heard from many people in regard to getting involved in the business, in getting involved in our business in one way, shape, or form. So it's I can understand that perspective where they would want to look at coming in and acquiring or whatever it is. I can tell you that my goal, the reason why I did this, I have a personal reason for it. Try not to get choked up, but home care, I've been in it for 10 years. First couple of years, it was just a great business model. I loved doing the business. I felt good about being able to help people and that type of thing. For me, it became real when my mom had a fall, and I saw how that impacted my family and my dad and my mom. She was perfectly fine one day and had trouble getting dressed the next. And that's something that so many families face right now. And I want to help those people. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Did that happen after you were in the industry?
Yeah, 2 years into it.
So it's interesting, and obviously, and you and I have talked about this. I think your emotional side is part of the value of why someone would buy into you. Is like you can be vulnerable and say, like, this is the moment that I had. You were in the industry and you didn't have that moment, so even like you obviously were good at what you did.
Yep.
But that passion piece changes, and that's where, like, if I would say 99% of the franchisees that I've met in this space, something happened in the corporate career where they were overlooked, and it opened an inch in the door for them to say, well, what if? Then they had that experience with an aging parent, and it made it real, and didn't just make it. I don't think it just makes it real for helping your parent. It also makes it real for you.
Yep. Because
you see, like, life will go fast, and life can change in an instant, and then now you mirror or marry those two things of corporate career isn't catching up to what I want it to be, and I have this personal experience, and I look at senior care, which,
right,
I think obviously, like, that's the special ingredient that you have that keeps your light on, which says I don't want to be acquired. The other statement I'll make is, I wrote a column years ago, and it was specifically around my story that at my former employer, I knocked on the door and said, I would like to be a partner in the business, and was rejected in multiple ways. I'm like, I'm here, I'm entrepreneurial, let me impact your business. And so the title of the column was Catch the Entrepreneur Before They Catch You. And so now if I look at your story, like, you had all this stuff. If someone would listen to your story, they could have caught you before you catch them. And now you have this, there's an additional chip on the shoulder because you want to win. You want to do things differently. And now you're going to go after them. And so I share that because, and I've used this line far too often, but you bet on the jockey, not on the horse.
Yep.
We're talking about a widget of senior care, but we're more so talking about you. And so if someone's watching this, the whole point is they need to listen to you as the leader and say, do I believe Dan could actually help me build wealth for my family?
Right. And you made a couple of really good points there. In particular, well, first of all, always being on the lookout for talent, and talent, it presents itself in different ways at different times, a lot of times when you're not expecting it. But being on the lookout for those individuals that are just, are capable of more than what they're currently doing. I think that's something that, as I've aged and as I've had my own experiences in the corporate world, I've become better at identifying talent. Going back to my father in coaching baseball, that's one of the things he was great at, is identifying talent and identifying potential and being able to tap into that potential and take them to the next level. When I look at, who is a good franchisee, who is a good home halo franchisee or senior care franchisee, many that I've worked with before, like you said, have a personal story. They have a personal connection. They had a mother or, a father, or grandmother, grandfather that needed care and either got really, really, really good care and they wanted to do more of that, or they got really, really bad care and they wanted to do something different, and both can be tremendously successful. And what I tie that back to is their why. Why are you doing this? Are you doing this just to escape, the corporate world? That is enough of a motivator. But what I really see is when somebody has a really big why in the home care space, and wants to make a difference in people's lives every single day and make money in the process, that's a recipe for success right there. And so I love working with those people. And one of the first questions that I ask a potential franchisee, and honestly, every single employee that I hire, why are you looking to invest in this business? Why are you looking to become a caregiver with our company? I'm looking for that story. I'm looking for that big why, because the why is what gets you over those obstacles when they come. And everybody knows you're going to have those obstacles.
What's your vision for the business right now?
So the vision, that's one of the things that, I think is it's kind of unique about me. I can see what I want it to look like in 10 years, how the path that we take to get it there. That's the part that's to be determined, but I see growing this business, in several different ways. First of all, attracting new franchisees, and growing the business that way. We'll continue to open up corporate-owned locations, just because I think that's a great way to grow the business as well. Grow my corporate-owned locations and then sell them to a franchisee as an existing cash-flowing, profitable business. That's really what I'm looking at. I'm looking for people who want to make a difference in people's lives every single day, make money in the process. Some of the people that I think can be good franchisees, we talked about those with just that personal why. But you don't have to come from a healthcare background to be successful in home care. I think nurses are predisposed to being very successful in this business because, they have an understanding of the healthcare system. They have that empathy, they have those assessment skills and that clinical judgment, which really comes in handy in this business. So they come from a healthcare background, but a lot of people, I would say most don't come to the home care space from a healthcare background. Maybe a quarter of them do. I see a lot of people that have been very successful in the corporate world. Athletes can be a tremendous franchisee because they're used to working within a system. They know how to focus on the fundamentals. And that's really what I'm doing as a coach and as a franchisor is I'm teaching those fundamentals. And it's just, if you look at baseball, you teach somebody how to field a ground ball properly. You teach them the proper stance and all of those kind of things. You teach them to be students of the game and situational types of things. Athletes are just excellent. They're already tailor-made for a franchise model. They just have to get in and execute. So they can be excellent franchisee. Veterans also can be excellent franchisees. They're used to following a system, and that's what franchising is. Why would you go and buy a franchise with the greatest cookie recipe in the world and use margarine instead of butter? You got to have somebody that's coachable, that's willing to follow that recipe.
If you weren't managing a franchise, if you're just building this enterprise, how many hours a week would you work? That's a great question. I love to work. I love doing what I do. I love making a difference in people's lives. I also love having the ability to work
at the times that I want to work. That as a business owner, that's very special to me. If I want to go for a 2-hour run in the morning, I'll do it. And I'll just work a little bit later. So it's nice to have that kind of autonomy and flexibility. I think that it's important for people to have balance in their lives. As a business owner, your ultimate goal should be to replace yourself, not to become irreplaceable, but to replace yourself. I want people who know the business as well as me running the business on my behalf. And, I'm guiding the ship. And so whether I was going the franchising route or just having all my corporate owned locations, my ultimate goal is to make myself replaceable. And that should be the goal of other business owners as well. You should be able to go and take a 2-week trip and your business not fall apart. It takes excellent systems. It takes excellent people, to be able to create that. So I think that's probably what I would be doing, what I'd be focusing on if I was just looking at having corporate owned locations.
You have how many corporate owned locations right now?
Right now we operate in 5 different states, 6 different states. So New Mexico, Iowa, Colorado, New Mexico, or Wisconsin, Texas, and Florida.
If they were franchisees, how many territories would that be?
That's a good question, because some of our offices cover very large areas. So, we work very closely with the VA. That is one of our payer sources. And, one of the things that we've chosen to do, from a VA contracting perspective, we've really focused on a lot of those rural areas that other home care agencies don't or won't serve. When you look at a franchise territory, it's typically, around 250,000 people that you serve. Most of them are in metropolitan areas, but there's a lot of veterans in rural areas that are underserved. They need care too, and so that's been one of the focuses that we've had is, serving some of those rural areas in New Mexico and Iowa in particular.
Well, truthfully, I'm leading the witness. I know what these answers are, so I'm guiding you towards it, but I mean, you're a large multi-unit operator. No matter how you cut it, whether it's states or it's territories, if there's a map of largest operators in this category, you would be at least in the top 10%, not arguably higher. Mm-hmm. And I asked you the question of hours, and you said I should be able to take a 2-week vacation. I should be able to go for a run for 2 hours. And the point of me asking that is, if I'm a buyer, I'm also listening very carefully to that answer, because what you're saying is I help people. I'm going to help show you what I did. I'm going to operationalize you to follow my model as far as you want to come. And look, I've built up a very large business by myself, and I still have time to live life. Right. And so to an outsider, like if you think about their journey in, aging parent causes them to see the category. They watch another caregiver, most likely another franchise brand, triggers them to say, I'm interested in exploring this category, and then they buy in. But if you buy in too big, you might not have the opportunity to build up a great portfolio. However, what you also just said is multi-state. Like you're navigating this business from a single state, and you've built up something sizable. So I'm painting that picture because we could get into the fundamentals of the caregiver or the VA relationships, all those things. But to someone that is in business, like the reality is you're not caregiving. Like that's not part of the deal. You're passionate about it, but you're not doing that. You're managing a business, and you're going to teach someone those same tools based on you doing this for another franchisor, fine-tuning your model, being an entrepreneur, and now putting it into play. And I think that's the beauty of what we're trying to extract here,
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And you mentioned about not providing care myself. I haven't, in the 10 years I've been in the business, I haven't provided a minute of care myself. It's hiring good qualified caregivers to do that. It's, putting good qualified management teams and training them well and giving them the resources and the autonomy to make decisions so that I don't have to make all the decisions. When part of the reason why I work as much as I do right now is because I'm continuing to expand. I'm continuing to open new offices in other states. a lot of the heavy lifting, like, when you look at a typical franchisor, so if an individual, wanted to buy a Home Halo franchise, they're going to be working their butts off at the beginning. They're going to be dialed in every single day. They're going to be working hard, but like we talked about, what you want to do is you want to leverage the system that's in place, but you also want to get to the point where you're making yourself replaceable, like we talked about, and so as you grow, you bring on more people and you train them properly within the system, and they're continuing to follow that system that you worked. And what that does is it then frees you up. If I just did not grow anymore and I just kept the locations that I currently have, the number of hours that I would have to work in a week aren't a lot. And the reason for that is I've hired very well qualified people, and I pay them well, because they're doing an amazing job for me, and they are making it so that I don't have to spend every single day working on these businesses. And that's how you scale, is by, utilizing systems, but bringing in highly qualified people that can run these things for you.
I'm gonna close by saying this. This last part of our conversation, majority of franchisors, if I put them all in a stadium and said on the count of three, tell me who you're looking for, they say multi-unit, multi-brand operators. Like that's the bulk of franchisors. What I hear from you is, let me find someone that is trainable, that is a culture fit. I'm going to train you on how to build this up so that you don't have to, eventually not have to work a lot. Right. And you're going to work as much as you want as you're scaling up this business. But I want to work with people that have scale mindset, that are coachable, like similar to what we were talking about on the baseball field.
Yep.
And if you can get the most out of someone who has been overlooked in corporate America, you're going to get to reap the benefit of the chip on the shoulder. They're going to reap the benefit of the chip on the shoulder, and they'll be doing it in a business that obviously has tons of legs left, because all the way to the beginning of our conversation, we talked about supply and demand issues. So look, I think you're doing things the right way. I'm grateful to know you on a personal basis too. And there's tons of room in this category, which is why you're finding your footing and realizing there might be a ton of competitors in the marketplace. It doesn't really matter. You're gonna do it your way, and you're gonna continue to chip off clients, and it's working. So
absolutely.
Thank you for doing this hot seat. I appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you having me. It's an honor to be in the hot seat.
It's an honor to be in a hot seat. For Dan, I'm Nick. This was another Franchisor Hot Seat.